To get us started, we're going to first dissect the stigma on mental health in particular. And to help guide us along, we're going to share a PowerPoint that will get us started. So, rethinking the stigma on mental health, understanding, empathizing, and ultimately avoiding the stigma. We're going to really dissect that. Now, when it comes to the stigma, when it comes to mental health, really anything, I like to make sure that we are first understanding what it is that we're addressing. If we can't identify the problem, it's very hard for us to learn how to approach it. So before we even get into the mental health stigma, I want us to first dissect what even the term stigma itself means. So a stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, person, or group of people based on their beliefs, based on whatever certain perspectives they may have that society ultimately does not approve of. It's a lack of respect for that group. It's a mark of shame and discredit, and ultimately is a negative label or stereotype that can take away from one's character or reputation. With that in mind, let's look at some of the specific and very common mental health stigmas that ultimately paint mental health and those who suffer from mental health issues in a very negative light that is undeserving. The first example is the false belief that mental and behavioral disorders are personally controllable or that people can simply choose to be happier. The truth is, no one would choose to suffer in the way that mental health takes hold of us. The idea that we can simply, flick a light switch and be happier and just choose our way out of it is not only hurtful and just discrediting to people who are suffering, but so just blatantly inaccurate. Mental illnesses are caused by biological factors, which can include genetics, brain chemistry, injury or physical illness, or life experiences, including trauma or history of abuse, or family history of mental health issues. And while treatment can help people fully recover from mental health issues, it is definitely more complex than simply choosing to be happier. So we don't want to stigmatize people who are suffering by, again, holding them personally controllable of that mental health. And the reality is, it is outside of our control to be experiencing these difficulties, and a part of our humanity to be vulnerable to them. The next stigma that we will address is the false belief that if individuals cannot get better on their own, they are seen to lack personal effort, are blamed for their condition, or are seen as personally responsible. So again, such a hurtful and unrealistic stigma, but yet so common. The truth is, there is no one size fits all treatment for mental illness. Some mental illnesses require medication to be managed, whereas others are treatable with therapy or lifestyle changes. And that's not really the point at the end of the day. One of the things I really like to utilize in addressing the stigma on mental health is comparing it to physical health. And it really helps put things into a empathetical and realistic framework. So in this example, just as a cancer patient is not blamed or accused of being weaker than another cancer patient who needs less chemotherapy, for example, or a less long duration of treatment, people should not be held to criticism or blamed if they may need more or a different level of intensity of mental health assistance or lifestyle changes even to improve their mental health. But in the same regard as physical health, we want to be able to offer our empathy and just be grateful that they're taking the steps they need to feel better. That's ultimately our goal. The next stigma example is the false belief that people with mental disorders are frightening, unpredictable, and strange. Again, something that is so devastatingly false and statistically proven to be so. The vast majority of people with mental health problems are no more likely to be violent than anyone else. And in fact, most people with mental health issues are not violent, and only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals living with a serious mental illness. In fact, on the flip side of things, people with severe mental illnesses are over 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than the general population. So again, such a horribly inaccurate and arguably reversed stigma that claims mental health issues lead to violence, lead to unpredictable, dangerous behaviors, when the reality is people with mental health issues are more likely to be victims of danger and victims of violence than they are to act out in such a way. The next example is the false labeling of individuals with mental and behavioral illness as unequal, rare, or inferior. This again is one that is quite simply just immediately disproven through very thorough statistics on mental health issues, not only in the US, but also across the world. Approximately 1 in 5 adults in the US, that's 43.8 million people, or 18.5% of our population, experiences mental illness in a given year. And one of the things I like to always preface when I use this statistic and many of other statistics when regards to mental health is that these are just diagnosed mental illnesses. So this does not include very common mental health issues like grief, something that literally everyone experiences, minor depression, minor anxiety, and more. So the commonality of mental health issues is statistically proven. And the reality is, and in the underlying concept that we want to really help share to debunk all these stigmas, that we all have mental health the same way we have physical health that can improve or worsen throughout our life based on the experiences that we have, based on our relationships, based on our circumstances, based on our age and stage in life. And the pandemic is an extremely upsetting and yet great example of how we don't always have control over the circumstances in our life. And it's very easy for something to interfere and restrict us and cause us great emotional turmoil, no matter again what age, stage, or background we're from. We're all vulnerable. So another great example of just the commonality and the application of mental health that we all are vulnerable to. And the next stigma is the false belief that individuals with mental health issues never succeed at certain challenges or cannot improve their situation. And yes, I'll be honest, people with mental health issues, not all of them, but some of them have limitations. I have my own limitations, but so do people with physical health issues. And in fact, so do all people. We all have our own unique strengths and weaknesses. We all have certain things that we excel at and certain things that we're not as great at, certain things that scare us, certain things that aren't within our comfort zone to do. That's a part of our humanity. It doesn't make us any less of a person, and it definitely doesn't make us any less able to succeed in the areas that we do want to pursue and that we're passionate about. So similarly, limitations are not necessarily permanent, and they do not prevent people with mental health issues from seeking success or improvements. And as a note on even where these limitations may come from, they may be a direct result from the mental health condition, but they can also even be a result of the treatment itself, like medication side effects, which is another thing that people can experience simply with physical health issues as well. So we want to be understanding that though people may be struggling with mental health issues, and yes, they may face some limitations or need a little space or whatever allowances to help them get through that, that does not make them any less capable of success, less capable at work, at love, at family, and at living a full life. So now that we've understood some of the common stigmas on mental health, what does that really mean? You may be thinking, well, those may be just words or just concepts in our society. So what harm could that really have? So let's really dive into what the damage of the stigma is, because I assure you it's very real and very tangible. So when mental health is stigmatized in our society, people suffering from mental health issues are more reluctant to seek help or treatment. They suffer in silence because they're afraid to speak to even loved ones about what they're experiencing, because again they worry that they'll be perceived as lesser, as weaker, as scary, as unpredictable and strange. People suffering from mental health issues have fewer opportunities for work, for school, for social activities. And they also, as mentioned, are more likely to be victims of bullying, violence, and harassment. In addition, people suffering from mental health issues do not receive adequate coverage from health insurance and do not have an equivalent access or means of professional support in the same regard as physical health issues in our society. But the worst way that the stigma impacts people with mental health issues is by internalizing those stigmas. When someone is experiencing mental health issues and they perceive the stigma to be real, which it is, they begin to also paint themselves in that same light. So if they perceive that society thinks that people with mental health issues are weak or lesser or unworthy or incapable of success or happiness, then they, and I can even say we in this regard, begin criticizing ourselves with those same labels. And this really creates a further damaging cycle of us not knowing our self-worth, of us, really worsening our mental health all in all because we're not receiving the help we need. And we're also stigmatizing ourselves to think that we aren't worthy of even that help. This can lead to self-harm, this can lead to isolation, and this can lead to guilt. And ultimately, when people suffering from mental health issues become isolated, become unable to get the support and treatment and acceptance that they deserve, the increase of suicide and just overall self-harm and damage is extremely high in comparison to the stigma being eliminated. So we really can see truly lethal responses to this stigma that leads people to live not only in silence and suffer in silence, but suffer in fear. So with that understanding and really realizing the seriousness of this stigma, what can we do? It can be a daunting task to want to change an entire world's view on a subject as complex and yet common as mental health. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing that we can do to combat the stigma and help spread this. So the first thing that we can do is to educate ourselves, to make an active effort to learn about mental health issues, to learn about mental illness diagnosis, to learn warning signs of when somebody or yourself needs help, and to learn treatment options. There's a lot of stereotypes and stigmas about ways to treat and manage mental health. And a lot of those can also be daunting and scary if we don't research and really know that there's a much broader assortment of resources at our fingertips to both learn from and to improve ourselves and others with. Separating the facts from fiction, separating the misconceptions, and again, these harmful stereotypes is how we can begin to reduce the stigmatization. Once we know the difference between fact and fiction, we can speak out. We can speak out against those who stigmatize others and those who discriminate and marginalize. And as I'm sure many of you are in the habit of standing up for those who are marginalized, standing up for minorities, but adding in mental health as part of that and being aware that there are many people who are additionally stigmatized for their mental health struggles. Empathizing is so very important. Empathizing is treating others the way that we would want to be treated. So what we want to do is try and put ourselves in other shoes. Try and think about how you would want people to treat you if you were struggling with mental health issues. And also try and understand the struggle of those experiencing these issues. Again, between education and talking to them and creating that dialogue and safe space. Next is avoiding labels. This is something that we do all too common in our very relaxed language revolving around mental health, where we can throw the word depression and anxiety out without really understanding the gravity of those terminologies. And so when we are talking about other people, it's important to remember to phrase things in a non-stigmatizing way. So for example, instead of saying he is bipolar, we would phrase it, he is struggling with bipolar disorder. And again, comparing physical and mental illness is a great go-to, just baseline rule. If you're ever faced with something and you're worried about that stigma, try and apply that parallel, and I assure you it will guide you in the right direction almost every the time. I can't even think of a time it wouldn't, but I don't want to speak in absolutes. um, and that even applies to the labels. We wouldn't look at someone and say he is diabetes. That doesn't even make sense, but somehow mental health issues can be applied, and by identifying somebody as just their illness, not the whole wonderful person that they are, we're truly belittling them, whether we mean to or not. So again, using that comparison of physical and mental illness is a great checkpoint. And you can ask yourself, why do you empathize, sympathize, and support those with physical illnesses differently and arguably better than you do those with mental illnesses? Understand what underlying stigmas you may be holding on to. Again, not to any fault of your own. These stigmas exist in our society. They're spread through social norms, and we do have to actively research and analyze to remove them. Another way that we can combat the stigma is learning warning signs. Learn the warning signs of mental illness and help loved ones get the help when they need it. People suffering from mental health issues may not always be comfortable opening up. It's very common, again, for people to suffer in silence because they're afraid of judgment. They're afraid of isolation. They're afraid of being criticized. So make it your task to try and ask, try and, keep tabs on your loved ones, and look for signs that they may need help. And we will talk a lot more about this at the end as well when we talk about the all method. Another way that we can combat the stigma is to accept the commonality. Again, the numbers are substantial in regards to just how common mental health issues are. And if you're looking for more statistics, I mean, a simple Google search will suffice, but our website also has a ton of different statistics on mental health, just to point out solely how common, how real these experiences are. With figures like these, it's really hard for us to hold on to the stigma that mental health is this rarity or this oddity, that makes us quote unquote not normal, when the fact is it's a very common and shared experience. Another way to combat the stigma is to advocate. Be supportive to your friends, your family, your coworkers. Let people around you know that you're a safe person to talk to, that you're going to be understanding, and that they can vent to you even without judgment, because you understand that they're going through a tough time. Again, that's something that we'll talk about in the all method, so that you're equipped to help people to be that safe space, and you know how to keep in the parameters of doing so. And in that same regard, connect. Again, make genuine connections. It's very easy in our modern world full of social media to really allow people to hide behind, smiling and all these positive social media profile pictures, or even just in the workplace or the grocery store. Most people are going to carry themselves with a fake smile just because it's what we do in our society. Don't be fooled by that means that everyone is always okay, both for your own perspective on mental health, as that can be, again, isolating to think that everyone else around you is just so happy when we're only seeing a small fragment. One of the challenges with mental health is that it is invisible to the eye a vast majority of the time. And that makes it hard to connect. It makes it hard to see. So make that extra step in your relationships, whether those be, again, familial or coworkers, or even just in your community and your peers, so that people know that you're somebody that isn't burdened or bothered by knowing how they're actually doing. So what does all of this lead up to? Right? We've understood what the stigma is. We've understood what it does. We've even understood how we can combat it. But what's the point? I mean, as I mentioned, it's a pretty daunting task to take on the stigma around the world and help create empathy and understanding, where in a lot of places and in a lot of ways there is none. But why should we even do it? When we stop the stigma on mental health, When we rethink the way mental health affects us all as human beings, more people, if not all people, will be able and willing to speak openly about what they are experiencing and seek the professional help that they may need without fear of judgment, discrimination, or harassment. When people suffering with mental health issues get the support and treatment they need, they can improve their condition and reduce, if not eliminate, the risk of self harm, addiction, and suicide. So ultimately, stopping the stigma can and will save lives.
So that concludes our first kind of portion on looking into the stigma, looking into how the stigma is addressed and ways that we can improve it. And one of my favorite tips in how to combat the stigma is to regard, view, and treat mental health issues the same as we view physical health. I think that if there's one thing you can remember regarding the stigma, it is that concept. Because anytime you're faced with a situation and you are challenged to be empathetic, you are challenged to be supportive, you're challenged to be inclusive, remembering that parallel will not only help how you treat others, but how you treat yourself. And there's just so many great parallels. For example, both physical and mental health issues require unique treatments. Again, there's no one size fits all for a vast majority of physical health issues, and the same applies to mental health issues. They are personalized based on many factors, and so it is important to understand that. Both physical and mental health issues are not a choice by the person experiencing them, but a natural consequence of both our humanity, our biology, and our life experiences. Both physical and mental health issues do not discriminate. We are all subject to experience health issues. No one is exempt. We can take all the vitamins, we can do all of the self-care in the world, and life sometimes throws those curveballs at us. So it is important to perceive others and yourself, if you happen to be experiencing mental health issues, physical health issues for that matter, that you aren't chosen. You aren't chosen for any specific reason, rather, or discriminated against. Anyone is subject, and that's what connects us all. We're humans, we're vulnerable. Both physical and mental health issues, likewise, deserve empathy. I can't emphasize this enough. If you are suffering from a mental health issue, same as if you were suffering from a physical health issue, whether that be you stubbed your toe or you have a chronic illness, you're suffering. There's pain involved, and just because we can't see or hear, perhaps, the pain in mental illness the same way as we do physical does not mean it is not there. So remember to empathize equally in both, or fairly in both, as there is an internal suffering that very few will probably have a window into. That's one of the shames of mental health, is it is very invisible. It can obviously be expressed in outward symptoms, but for the most part, it's going to be internal. And so make sure we're empathizing. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Both physical and mental health issues have a range of impact. Like I mentioned, as an example, from stubbing your toe to having a chronic illness, the same range applies to mental health issues. For example, I myself, I have anxiety that continues before this webinar. I felt that climb of anxiety. That's a momentary experience that I'm able to push through, but the reality is that is in itself its own experience of mental health. I've also experienced, serious clinical depression episodes, and those are more long-term. Those are more, impactful over a broader range of my life, including even the inability to carry out my usual functions. So there can be brief or localized mental health and physical experiences, and there can be chronic mental health experiences as well as physical health experiences that require constant, continuous management. So be mindful that that's another parallel between the two. And the good news out of really all of this, and really what shapes this parallel, is that both physical and mental health issues can be improved. They can be improved and even prevented when proactive measures are taken. Just as with physical health, we are aware of our bodies. We're aware of how our bodies feel. We're aware of ongoing symptoms that we may be sick, we may just not be fully ourselves. We're aware of how we proactively take care of our physical health. We're aware of the foods we eat, the diet we choose, whether we exercise or not, or how much we exercise. We take proactive steps. And if we don't, we're at least aware that we are neglecting, for lack of a better word, to take proactive care of our physical health. The same principle applies to mental health. We can take proactive care of our mental health. We can be mindful of how our brain feels, how our emotions are doing. And we can both prevent heightened emotions or emotional dysregulation by applying self-care, applying coping skills in our daily life. And we can also eliminate the escalation of emotions, eliminate the escalation of the impact of our mental health by putting in additional coping skills, by getting help, by talking to people, so that we're able to maintain mental well-being. And from that, we will start looking inward. Let's start looking at some of these tangible ways that we can proactively improve and maintain our mental health. So the first one we're going to go over of 10-minute self-care techniques. Now, self-care is a word that has been a buzzword of late, and I couldn't be more happy about that. Self-care is really as simple as it is just that. It's taking care of yourself. It's taking the time you need to give yourself a break, to be patient with yourself, to bring your mood and your temperament down, and to ultimately practice taking care of your mental well-being. Here are a list of 30 different self-care techniques, all of which can be done within 10 minutes. The good news is this means you can do this in the morning before you leave for work. You can do this at work during your breaks, even a quick bathroom visit if you'd like. You can fit these in throughout your day easily without really needing anything except your own body and perhaps a few minor items like paper and pen or some music or a snack. But ultimately, these are easy activities to fit into your daily life. And I'd like to look at a few in particular here, just to break down and give you a little bit more detail on what those might look like. The first one that I'm going to highlight is number 10, which is eat/drink mindfully. Now, another buzzword that's been going around, and again, very pleased at this, is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a practice out of DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, and it is of critical importance to not only managing your emotions, managing your mental well-being, and bringing your mind down to a calm, relaxed state, but can be extremely helpful just to be more present in our life. We live in a very fast-paced world, and I feel many people get caught up looking towards the future, looking towards next week, next month's plans, next summer's vacation, whatever it may be. And while there's great benefit in looking forward, we don't want to forget to live right now, to stay in the moment, to enjoy this moment that we're experiencing to its fullest. Eating, drinking mindfully is a great self-care technique because you already have to do it. You're already going to be eating or drinking throughout the day. So when you're doing this, this is a way for you to get some duality out of an already experienced task. So for example, you're on your lunch break, and many of you, again, busy work day, you're still thinking about the meeting you have right when you get back from work. You're thinking about, how you have to finish off paperwork, etc. And instead, take this time for yourself. Take this time to focus on what you're eating and what you're drinking. Do not think about what you have to do when you return to work. Do not think about what you have to do at 5 p.m. Do not think about what you have to do in 3 months. Think about what is happening now. Mindfulness as a practice involves 3 main concepts. The first is to stay in the moment. So again, don't think about anything but your current experience. Naturally, you're going to have other thoughts pop into your head. Don't get mad, don't get frustrated. Mindfulness is an acquired skill, but simply try and let that thought pass. Try and dismiss that without frustration, without judgment, and continue focusing on the task at hand. Be non-judgmental, not only non-judgmental towards the experience you're having to avoid heightened emotions, to avoid criticisms, opinions, and judgment, but also towards the experience as a whole. Really try and be objective in fully saturating your experience. This includes engaging your five senses. So as you're eating, think deeply, or just in general, be mindful, be attentive to the taste, to the different flavors that you're getting out of this food. Be mindful to the color of the food. Really analyze that, take that in, absorb the minute details that we overlook. And obviously you may be saying, well, why is it really important to care what, shade of color the lettuce is in your salad? That's judgment right there. That's part of the opinions and judgment that we want to eliminate. We want to quiet our brain down to its most primitive functions of just utilizing those five senses, being in this exact moment, dismissing those outside thoughts, and enjoying ourselves and the serenity that we can get out of this everyday activity. This is going to bring you to a calm, collected state. It's going to recharge you mentally. And again, it's something that you can do every single day, 1 to 3 times a day, for however many meals you have. And really practice self-care in a very easy to add situation. The next self-care I'd like to highlight is practice smiling. Now, what we mean by this is not just the general concept of, hey, put a smile on, don't show people you're upset. We definitely do not want to encourage that. But rather, practice smiling evokes a psychological concept called the half smile. And the half smile is a clinically approved concept and well-researched that demonstrates that the muscles in the face communicate to the emotional part of the brain and vice versa. So we often think that, yes, emotions obviously dictate our facial expressions, our body gestures, making us slouch, making us sit up more upright. But we can also evoke this in a reverse manner. So having a half smile, not a huge fake grin, but just a slight tilt up in 1 or 2 corners of your mouth, can actually communicate back to your brain and convince you to elevate your mood. Again, emotions have a give and take relationship with your facial muscles, and half smiling can convince your brain to relax more, be more happy, start focusing on more positivity. It also can invite others to be happier. Smiles are contagious. So in the workplace, in the community, in your family home, having that half smile can also help contribute to others' mental health and others' happiness, and invite them to be kinder towards you and uplift your mood as well. When you see people sulking, for better or worse, usually you feel that they may need their space. And while this is a potentially fair assumption, putting that half smile on might invite others to come join you, might invite others to ask how you're doing, and ultimately that can assist in improving your mental health as well. The next one I'd like to touch on is number 28. And this is turn off social media and your phone or your computer. Take a time out. I think right now with COVID-19 going on, this is one of the most important self-care tips that I can recommend. The media, the constant updates on news, while as important as it may be to be up to date with the times, the constant flow of information can be extremely inundating, and it can wear us down as we are trying to constantly stay on top of what the latest and greatest information is. This includes also social media usage and just communications via text. Those notification beeps constantly overflowing, seeing your email inbox constantly filling up, it can be a big trigger for stress. So it is excellent if you have the ability, obviously not while you're at work, not a great idea, to just turn off your computer the whole time. But if you have the opportunity, when you have the opportunity to take some quiet time, unplug for a while, meditate, and there's many ways you can do this. You don't have to necessarily be alone just because you turn off digital communication. But if you are alone, enjoy that alone time. Challenge yourself to take in what it's like to be with yourself. This is something, again, in our highly connected world, which has a billion benefits, we forget to just find solace and peace in being alone. And there could be great benefits of enjoying your own company. And you can do so also in a meditative way, in a mindful way, taking a walk, taking in nature, you know, being peaceful in your thoughts and focusing on your own goals and your own well-being. You can also take this time to unplug from these digital connections and really build quality in-person connections. Again, it's wonderful that we can connect and communicate at a moment's notice with anyone around the world if we so choose. But we cannot neglect the importance and distinction of quality connections and quality communication that occurs in a face-to-face setting. Obviously, right now, some restrictions on that face-to-face part, but the main goal is still to work on valuing those in-person connections and those deeper connections than simply a like or a hug now, and really making something more out of your relationships. And another way to really utilize this is just to slow down. Again, this fast-paced world we're living in, fast-paced communication, fast-paced information, fast-paced demand for pretty much whatever we want. These modernizations to our society are wonderful and advantageous, but they are not always conducive to a healthy mental well-being if we're constantly in a rat race. So use this time out, this unplug time, to slow down a little bit, take it easy, rest your mind, and enjoy that peace. And while self-care techniques can be quick and even automated practices, once you get the hang of utilizing these, you can incorporate them almost naturally without thinking. And that's ultimately a wonderful goal, is to practice self-care to the point where you aren't even really thinking about actively taking time for yourself, but you are just naturally incorporating that self-care time or that self-care activity into your life. These are great at improving your overall mental well-being, sustaining a higher level of happiness and peacefulness in your mental constitution. But sometimes we need to dig a little bit deeper to establish and reinforce our emotional resilience. And the difference between emotional resilience and mental well-being. Mental well-being essentially puts us at a baseline, and baseline is a great place to be, believe me. But a baseline might not always protect us when life throws us curveballs, when life throws adversities that we are otherwise unprepared for. Again, COVID-19 being the most universally understandable situation, as none of us expected this. None of us had planned for this or how we'd react to this, but we had to face it nonetheless. And there are unfortunately many situations in life that can provide this kind of dilemma, including the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, living situation, financial changes. These things can occur without notice, without preparation. And we want to be emotionally resilient. We want to have a core strength of emotional resilience so that we are more prepared, we are more sound mentally, and we are stronger as we have to deal with these difficult, stressful, or trying times in life. To address these kind of activities or these type of situations, I recommend an activity called the mantra. And I'm going to show you next. Again, this is our next worksheet that you should have a copy of as well, to create an emotional resilience mantra. And what I love about the emotional resilience mantra is, again, it can be used anytime. You can tell yourself this mantra in the mirror when you wake up in the morning. You could take a quick break to the bathroom at work if you're feeling overwhelmed and say this to yourself. You could say it in silence. You could say it out loud. You could write it down 3 times. There's tons of ways to utilize your mantra and remind yourself to have that emotional resilience as you feel new stressors or life's adversities build up in your life. And the other nice thing is it's fully customizable. So I'm going to walk you through the format for creating the mantra. And ultimately, I invite all of you to complete this yourself and create your own mantra that speaks specifically to you, using your language, using words that resonate well with you, and give it a try. It's going to feel awkward at first. I am not going to lie. It is a little bit strange to decide to talk to yourself or tell yourself to feel certain ways or remind yourself these things. But at the same time, consider how easy it is for you to be supportive of others. If a friend, if a colleague came to you and they were dealing with some, additional stressors in their life, and they were frantic or they were at a heightened emotional state because of it, it would be extremely easy and natural for you to give them the compassion they need and tell them that this hurts a lot right now, and we understand that, but you're not alone, and you're so strong, you'll overcome this, and it's going to be okay. That would be first nature to say to most loved ones and arguably strangers. But when it comes to ourselves, we're much less likely to provide that same compassion in the form of self-compassion, which is one of the best ways we can build emotional resilience. So here are the steps for creating this mantra. The first portion is about mindfulness. So again, being present in the moment. This line can be something like, "This hurts a lot right now. In this moment, I am struggling." The importance of this is to isolate the moment, because just like many physical pains, just like most experiences in life, everything is temporary. We have heightened states and we have low states and we have waves. So remind ourselves that this is how I'm feeling right now. It's not my forever. This isn't going to be forever, but right now I'm hurt. Right now I'm sad. Right now I'm struggling. I'm overwhelmed. The second part reflects our common or shared humanity. And shared humanity is one of my favorite concepts. It's actually something we teach in our social emotional learning curriculum for middle school students, because it's so overlooked and yet so important to realize that as human beings, we are subject to our emotions. We're emotional beings. It is in our nature. We're subject to suffering. We're subject to go through these trying times. But in these times, we often feel our most alone, which is the irony of all of this. The reality is we're not alone in what we're experiencing. Yes, someone else may not experience the exact same situation, the exact same scenario, but ultimately, we're not the first person to experience this situation, and other people feel this way too. The third part is where you show yourself empathy. For example, "I am strong and will overcome. May I be kind to myself as I go through this." Again, those phrases that you would easily offer to someone else, be sure to offer to yourself. And the fourth part is to remind you of your toughness or your emotional resilience, and that you deserve joy, you deserve calm, you deserve to get through this. My needs are important. I've been through a lot and will overcome. Encourage yourself to move forward, encourage yourself to feel better and resolve the issues. Give yourself the confidence you need to face whatever adversity or stressor you are facing.
So the last thing that I want to talk about is our all support method. We've looked at the broad spectrum of things. We've looked at the stigma on this grand scale, this global scale, and then we've looked at mental health internally and really looked at what steps we can take. So now let's look at our neighbors. Let's turn to our friends, our family, our loved ones, our coworkers, our peers, our community members, and think about how we can support their mental health. What's beautiful about the all method is it is not a practice that needs to be done by a mental health professional. You don't need any additional training resources. As much as I encourage all of the steps to combat the stigma as additional value in helping those around you, the all support method is universally applicable and extremely advantageous. And again, is a guideline to keep you within the parameters, because it's not always easy to know how to help those around you. The ALL method is an acronym for ask, listen, and limit. And I'm going to, of course, address what all of those mean in detail and what that can look like. So the first is ask. And again, we've talked about this throughout our session in many other ways. But as mentioned, not everyone shares their mental health. Not everyone has that on their shoulder. And too often in our society, we are hiding behind positive social media pictures. We're hiding behind a fake smile to go about our business throughout the day. So again, mental health can very often and more often than not be invisible to the naked eye. Unless we really ask someone how they're doing, we cannot expect to assume or to know that they may be struggling. So, for those in your support group, for those in your close family, or for those in your workplace, whoever it may be in your community that you want to show your care for, really ask. Go beyond the first, how are you? Good, and moving on with the conversation. Ask them further. And it doesn't mean you have to pry, it doesn't mean you have to really beg them to open up to you. But it also means that you're making the gesture of caring for them and they can see you as a safe person to open up to. So make yourself available. Explain, hey, if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Hey, if you ever want to share more about what's going on, let me know. So you're making yourself available to listen to them. You're showing that you have a genuine interest in their life and their well being. And that is the first step. Again, you can't force someone to open up with you. You can't force them to even open up with themselves. That's not really how mental health works. But we can make ourselves apparent that we care and that we're here for them and that we're here also to listen, which leads us to our next point. As many of us know, it's far too common for us to let our own voice dominate a conversation. As many of us know, it's far too common for us to let our own voice dominate a conversation. We have this concept in our society where we listen to talk instead of listening to respond. And when we do this, we end up accidentally invalidating what other people are saying because we're too busy worrying about what we want to say in response, as opposed to giving them the space to be heard. When supporting others, spend 75 to 90% of your time just listening. The power of listening to someone who's struggling, who's having a tough time, is far greater than crowding them with advice. Again, liking the sound of our own voice and wanting to help them. It's a genuine thing. Many of us feel strongly that when we're powerless, especially when it comes to mental health, we can't fix this person, right? We can't do anything. We're a different person in entirety. So it's fair to want to give as much advice as possible. It's fair to want to really try and provide as many tools as we can. But again, for the health of them and ourselves, honestly, in that relationship, sometimes the best way to get started is just to listen. Give them the space to express themselves, which, as we've talked about, is one of the greatest coping skills that we can utilize, is just expressing ourselves. So on the receiving end, give them that space to express themselves. Avoid projecting your feelings and thoughts onto them, but validate them. Validate how they feel with support. And validation is one of the most powerful things we can do in a support system. It doesn't mean we even agree with how they're feeling. It means that they have a right to those feelings. They're entitled to feel how they feel. We can't take that from them. They cannot be wrong for feeling. And that's something that our society also struggles to grasp. It leads to a lot of stigmatization of mental health as well, because we'll look at somebody who on the outside has everything going for them: money, relationships, jobs, whatever it may be, whatever our perspective of success and happiness is. We look at this individual and say, well, they embody everything. How could they possibly be depressed? How could they be upset? How could they be angry? How could they be frustrated? And this projection is our means of invalidating how they feel, when the reality is your circumstances don't dictate your mental health. We've seen this in celebrities who, again, appear to have it all and yet suffer with deep depression and deep struggles. So our circumstances don't dictate whether or not we are allowed to have mental health issues. Mental health issues doesn't discriminate. It affects any of us and all of us. So again, don't project your feelings or thoughts, but validate them, that they are, again, allowed to feel however they feel. even if that's not how you would feel in that situation, even if you disagree with how they feel in that situation, that's not your right to project onto them. And we'll tap into the second L a little bit here, but using I statements if you do offer advice. So during that 25 or that 10 to 25% of the time that you want to give advice, you want to give feedback, outside of, again, validating them and letting them know that it's okay and that you understand how tough that must be. But when we are going to give advice, we want to make sure we're using I statements. We're giving advice out of our own experience as opposed to using should statements, or as opposed to using demands or ultimatums, but rather something like, when I felt grief after the loss of someone that I loved, I tried speaking to a grief counselor and that helped me. The difference between that and you should go see a grief counselor, that'll fix your problems. There's a huge difference between those two approaches. And so we want to make sure, that we are not, again, projecting things by force, by should statements, but rather using our own I statements and experiences is a perfectly appropriate way to offer advice. It also is just a gentler way in general. In fact, if we could use I statements across the board in our society, we do wonders for our mental health. They're a beautiful technique for communication. And the last piece here is limit. And again, we talked about this a little bit in giving advice, but it's such an important piece of this. If you are not a mental health professional, avoid giving advice that is outside of your understanding. Even if you have read up significantly on a certain subject, really only speak to what you personally know and are qualified to say. If you have a resource that you've run across, you're welcome to refer them to that resource. Say, hey, I read this article about this. It really helped me understand this concept better. Would you like to see it? But again, avoid preaching in a sense or giving advice that you're not qualified to give, outside of I statements that are, again, a reflection of your own experiences. This will help avoid any misleading or wrongfully advising the person you're trying to help. And again, that's what the all method is all about. We want to help people, but sometimes even with the most well-intended viewpoints, our help can also hurt people. It can hinder them. It can push them in the wrong direction. So we want to make sure that if we're giving advice, we're not giving advice from a place where we don't really have the authority, the training, or the qualifications to do so. And if the conversation raises any red flags of concern, for example, if they mention an intent to harm themselves or others, you can take that moment to signpost, to suggest that they seek help from someone more experienced, more equipped to help, such as a mental health professional. A lot of times I've talked to people in regards to the all method, and they've said, I just never know what to say. What do I say to help someone? And the answer is, don't say anything if you don't know what to say. Say you don't know what to say. That's perfectly appropriate. You don't have to have all the answers. You can be very honest and say, you know what? I feel so bad. But I don't know what to tell you right now. If there's any way I can get you some additional help, I'd love to, because I don't have the know-how to really help you with this. I wish I could, but I don't know what to say. How can I help find somebody that can help you? Know your limitations. Know your limitations as far as your advice, and don't try and push yourself outside of that for the sake of helping someone, because again, it could ultimately even do more damage than good. And limitations is a two-part piece, which is just beautiful. Because the second part of limitation is by far the most important part of this entire process. It's hard to say that because a lot of people disagree, and they do feel that when you're in the supporting role of others, you need to be completely selfless. You need to give and give and give no matter what. And while, again, that is so well intentioned and so passionate, and I admire that courage to want to give everything to help others. That's beautiful. The reality is, we need to set limitations to how much we can support others. No matter how much we loved someone, no matter how much we care, no matter how much potential we see, no matter how much it pains us to see someone struggling, we need to set the boundaries so that we do not help someone if it's hurting ourselves. I teach this to our advocates in our advocate program. Honestly, on a weekly basis, I remind them that we cannot give from an empty cup. If we are not taking care of our own mental health, or if our support of someone else is hindering our own mental health, then we are of no use to them. We have to be able to set those limitations and those boundaries. And that is what's going to give us the most effective way of supporting others. So, despite how badly you want to help others, remember that you're also not solely responsible for someone else's mental health. It's a silly adage, but it honestly applies really well, which is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And when we're talking about mental health issues, in order for someone to make improvements, in order for someone to work on their mental health issues, to work towards recovery, it needs to come from inside. You can't force them to do that, no matter how well intentioned you are, and no matter how many ultimatums you may throw at them, which again is something I don't recommend. Um, uh, People need to find it on their own, which also means that we need to set the limitation to know that no matter how much we've done, no matter how hard we've tried, it's not on us if they ultimately don't recover. It's not on us if they relapse. Relapsing is also a part of mental health recovery, a part of our recovery as human beings. We all fail. We all take a few steps back every once in a while, and sometimes it's what we need. Sometimes hitting those roadblocks is what helps wake us up to realize we need to forge a different path. So don't don't be afraid to let people stumble, because it's, again, you can only do so much from a supportive role, and sometimes that stumble can help them grow more than we realize it. Even as a parent, that's something that's tough to grasp, but we do have to let our children fall sometimes so that they can learn for themselves. There's only so much that we can force them into learning and knowing. It takes their own experience and it takes their own drive. So ultimately, that is what our all method is, broken down obviously into great depth so that it's really thorough. But it says also as simple as ask, listen, and limit. Ask how people are doing. Go beyond that initial "how are you?" fine. Make it present that you are there to support them and that you're available if they want to open up to you. Listen. Spend more time listening than talking. Spend more time just validating their feelings than even trying to explain them or give advice around them. And limit what advice we give and how we give advice based on the knowledge and qualifications that we actually have. And most importantly, limit the support that we give others to the extent of it hurting or causing our own mental health to decline in the process. That is the all support method.